letting folks in. All right. Got some folks getting ready to join us. Welcome, everyone. We're going to give everyone just a couple of minutes to get everyone settled, get everyone in our little Zoom webinar here today, our live stream of Sustainable in the City. So as you are all joining, welcome, welcome, welcome. We are very excited to have a wonderful guest today here with us, and we can't wait to start sharing and chatting with our guests, but we'll give everybody just another couple of minutes to get into our Zoom here. Make sure you've got lunch. I hope folks are having a nice lunch while they're watching today or listening in. We'll get started here in just a second. All right, for those that are joining us, we're giving everybody just a minute to hop into Sustainable in the City. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today, Wednesday, second Wednesday of the month, every month, to talk about all things waste and sustainability here in Nashville. Today's topic, as you can see, is sustainable design with community in mind. So a very exciting topic that we have today. And we've got a wonderful guest to talk about all of the things that go on with the Civic Design Center and how they contribute to this sustainable design with community in mind. And all right, so we're about 1 minute in, so we're going to officially get started today. So first off, everybody, welcome to Sustainable in the City. I am here with my host, Simone Chet. She is one of our brand new zero waste team members that have joined the Zero Waste team. You'll also notice that Christina Langoni from Urban Green Lab, she is not here today. She is feeling under the weather. So we are extraordinarily sad that she is not here today, but we are excited to have Simone help us and join us and co-host with us today. But as always, Sustainable in the City, that's where you're at right now. And this is a partnership between Zero Waste Nashville as well as Urban Green Lab. So I'm Jen Harmon. I am the Zero Waste Program Manager with Metro Nashville and the Zero Waste Nashville team. And again, Simone is my colleague that also works on our Zero Waste Nashville team. And then this is a joint program with Urban Green Lab, local nonprofit that does all kinds of things to support zero waste and other sustainability efforts here in Nashville. So I'm going to turn it over to Simone to talk about the logistics for our episode today, because as you know, we have a few logistics. We use the chat, we use the Q&A. So Simone, I will let you take it away.
All right. Hello, everybody. Nice to, I guess I can't see you, but be here with you. And I apologize for any background noises you might hear as I am in a very busy office. But we just want to remind you all to, if you have a question, just type that into the Q&A. And if you want to, just type it there and then we will answer all of our questions there. Please save the chat feature for any resources that you might have, resources or comments that you have that will go along with the conversation and what we're talking about. You can use that there. And so we are going to ask a question in the Q&A, make sure it's working for everybody. So I'm going to pop that in there if I can remember where it is. Okay. Actually, Jen, do I have access to be able to type into the Q&A?
We are actually going to test out the chat. So just as a reminder, yes, so we want to make sure that everybody's using the chat correctly. So it's a great opportunity for y'all to continue your conversations about what we're talking about, share your thoughts. So we've got a question for you today. Since we have the Civic Design Center with us, we want to know from you. There it is. Simone popped it in. Has anyone participated in a Civic Design Center event or maybe volunteered with a design center? So if you can select to everyone, make sure you're talking to everybody, not just hosts and panelists. Everyone wants to hear what you have to say. So use that chat feature to pop in. There's a lot of you here. I'm sure someone here has participated in a Civic Design Center event. Have you gone to parking day? Have you done a pachaka-cha? One of my favorite words to say. So go in the chat and be sure to answer that question. We've got a quiet group. Get chatty in the chat. Or is there something going on with the chat that happened last time? Hold on. Remember
Someone
last
wants
time,
to say
everyone?
hello, just to make sure that it's working. That would be great.
Hold on. We had a really fun situation last time. All right, everybody. It's got a weird setting that I've messed up. Panelists can chat with everyone. We're working. This happened. This is now twice in a row. Okay, third time's a charm. Next episode, I'm going to fix whatever setting we have set that is keeping us from having the chat function automatically work. Perfect. Okay, thank you, Benjamin. It is working now. So again, has anyone participated in a Civic Design Center event or volunteered with Civic Design Center? Yes. Wonderful. George has participated. A lot of not yets, but I like the word yet. Parking day. It is one of my favorites. Awesome. So this was a perfect exercise. There's a couple of you that did only chat to hosts and panelists. So make sure in the to section, you select everyone. That makes sure everybody can see your see anything that you're sending off to people. So I think I saw Carolyn and Joanne. You want to set your setting to everyone and not just hosts and panelists when you use the chat. That just makes sure everybody can see what you're chatting about. So wonderful. It looks like we've got a good group here of people that are maybe interested in participating in an event. So that is great. Wonderful. And with that, I think we're going to go ahead. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we are going to introduce our guest today and get ourselves started into our interview. So I am really excited to welcome Eric Hoke. He is the design director at the Civic Design Center, and he's here today to talk with us about sustainable design with community in mind. So welcome, 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 Eric. And thank you so much for being with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Great to be here.
All right, so I'm jumping in. I am jumping into our first question. So we'd love to first know just a little bit about you. How did you find yourself working in community design for the Civic Design Center? Really, we kind of want to know, what has Eric's journey looked like?
Yeah, well, I grew up in the Chicago area and I moved around a little bit. I went to Ohio University for interior architecture. And then I actually did my thesis on a high-speed rail hub for an interior architecture class. So I was already interested in kind of community and transportation issues in the Chicago area and beyond. And so my thesis connected the Midwest with a high-speed rail network through this interior design. And then, yeah, and so that sort of, I mean, it was clear then to me that I was interested in something else, but had this degree in interior architecture, so moved around, found myself in Nashville. And then I actually, when I moved here in 2012, and we were talking about the East-West connector, also known as the AMP, which ultimately didn't happen. But it got me involved in Civic Design Center program that was talking about the kind of benefits and potential and trying to engage people in that discussion. So I jumped in sort of in that event, and then I was like, this organization's really cool. Started volunteering. I got an internship, and then I really never looked back. I mean, since I've lived here, I've been participating with the Design Center in some fashion, and just really like the work of our organization and the mission. So that's kind of my journey here, I guess.
No, that's great. I remember when I first moved to Nashville, AMP was it was on the table and we were really excited about it, and then very disappointed that it didn't happen. But it's wonderful to have you, and a great journey. So let's talk a little bit more about the Civic Design Center. How did the Civic Design Center get started? What is the mission of the organization? And then can you talk a bit about the guiding principles that drive the work of the Civic Design Center?
Yeah, definitely. So the Civic Design Center's mission is to advocate for civic design civic design visions and actionable change in communities to improve quality of life for all. So basically, we advocate for the city, and look to use best practice in planning and community design to be thought leaders and influence change throughout our built environments. And so we do that through like educational events like urban design forums, parking day. It seems like some people in the chat might have participated in that. And Jen, I know you have in the past too. And so it happens through various forms, which we can discuss later. But the formation of kind of our origin story, it really grew out of kind of this grassroots movement. There was a group called the Urban Design Forum prior to the Civic Design Center, and they met regularly to discuss civic issues. And at the time, kind of in the late 90s era, there was a plan to build a highway through the center of downtown where Korean Veterans Boulevard stands now. And so this group, the Urban Design Forum, met and created an alternative vision they called the Franklin Corridor, which was a sort of a human scale version of a highway that could, that could support large traffic volumes, but also was walkable and friendly and, had that human feel. And so they were successful in lobbying the state and the city for this kind of alternative vision. And then they decided that they needed a group or an organization to basically continue this advocacy. I mean, these people were just doing this out of sort of volunteer time, and they thought, we need an organization that's going to do this regularly. So they formed the Civic Design Center in 2001, I believe. And then the first project was this book called The Plan in Nashville, which took on, there's hundreds of Nashvillians that participated in basically a 40-year vision for the city. And so that was published in 2005. I think we've already surpassed a lot of what we thought a 40-year vision looked like from that book. But if you haven't seen The Plan in Nashville, you could get it at the library and stuff like that. It's a great publication. But out of that, probably the biggest outcome for our organization beyond the visioning efforts was the guiding principles. And so there were originally 10 guiding principles that came from the Plan in Nashville. And so those were great. Last year, we celebrated our 20th anniversary of our organization, and we actually added 2 guiding principles. One of them is sort of a housing focus, and the other is ecology and sustainability focus principle, because although those were in the original guiding principles, it wasn't explicit. So that's what we just wanted to like reinforce, that those were 2 things that I mean, honestly, they weren't as big of issues to Nashvillians 20 years ago. And so we thought, it's really important that we incorporate that in our work very intentionally. So I guess just to the principle is that around sustainability is prioritize design that alleviates impacts on the environment's natural resources. So they're all, pretty short and concise, but and broad enough where we can sort of touch a lot of categories. And so that is the principle that that hopefully will lead us through the next 20 years to work on sustainable advocacy.
Wow, that is it's just fascinating to think of a highway going down Korean Veterans. I just can't even imagine what downtown Nashville, we've already got that. I think most everybody knows that interstate loop that already creates so many barriers for connecting the city. I just can't imagine another one going straight through downtown. But certainly a project like that and advocacy has led to some wonderful work that the Civic Design Center has now done for Nashville.
Yeah, and I'll just add too that these ideas about and that was sort of like an underlying tone throughout the Plan in Nashville. They actually looked at several sections of that loop, the highway loop that exists today, and made recommendations to either dismantle or rethink parts of those. And that was pretty radical at the time. But since then, cities all across the U.S. have implemented interventions such as like urban boulevards that, converting highways to boulevard style things, or just capping highways. And there's all kinds of really interesting and innovative solutions for interstates as barriers.
Yeah, that was one of my favorite things about the Nashville plan. I really loved that, the way that it looked and the connectivity. So if y'all haven't checked out the Nashville plan, make sure go to your public library and pick it up. All right, so getting into your work specifically with Civic Design Center, what does it mean to be the design director, and what is your role within the Design Center?
Yeah, so I think I have the best job in the world. I get to participate in really fun and exciting and innovative projects, and that's sort of where my wheelhouse is I work on the projects that we do as an organization. It often ends up in the form of an event or um, something else, but that's sort of what I'm centered on and focus on doing. So that means I work with our design studio team, which is small but mighty, and we can basically our task is sort of to further the work and visions of communities and neighborhoods. And so we do that through sort of a few various ways, but I guess the sort of one big portion of the design studio is a group we have called Turbo, which stands for Tactical Urbanism Organizers. And so tactical urbanism is like this jargony planning term that we use, but it basically means like temporary, low cost, pop up style infrastructure that we can use to basically test public space. And so often we do sort of placemaking and traffic safety projects with those. But the kind of the thing with those is those projects come from the neighborhoods, and so we know that people that live on their streets know it better than most traffic engineers and people that end up making decisions don't necessarily know the street like the people who live on it. So that's kind of the thought, is that you are the expert in your neighborhood, and a lot of great ideas can come and be tested through Turbo, and you can go on our website and basically plug in what we call Turbo work orders if you have an idea about how to make a change in your neighborhood. And then we'll work with you to sort of highlight the issue, elevate it, and then seek funding for this kind of low scale infrastructure. But then it becomes sort of an advocacy effort to rally elected officials or whoever government departments to look and think about what a long-term change could look like.
Very cool. All right, so I'm going to go to a broader question because we might get a little bit more into those programs that you work on in a minute, but kind of broaden things up a little bit. Can you talk a little bit about how good design and urban planning dovetails with creating both environmentally and socially sustainable communities, and how equity intersects with this work?
Yes. So I guess I'll kind of start with I think it's essential to incorporate what I'll call smart development into how we design our cities. And so that and that also always has a social component. And so I guess a sustainable city is an efficient city. And so like that's a way that if you think about a city that has, or a neighborhood even, that has like a 15-minute or 10-minute walking radius, that's sort of what I'm talking about. And a walking radius where you have a grocery store, some entertainment, you have access to the things you need within a 10-minute walk of where you live. And I think that's that can sort of start to inform our goals and how we can create efficient, if you have efficient building, you can provide utilities more easily, you can provide transportation more easily. And so it alleviates government costs for one, and then also just makes for more livable cities and places to live. So I guess there's actually a note in the if you're familiar with the Parks Plan to Play, that's one of their big planning efforts. There's a recommendation in there that everyone in Nashville should live within a 10-minute walk of a park. And I think that sort of embodies what I'm talking about when I'm saying smart growth. Like a park should be also in that 10-minute walking radius. So that is a goal of Metro Parks, and I think that sort of speaks to like a bigger planning goal as well. And so I would I'm kind of a planning nerd, I guess, and so I would recommend everyone look at Plan to Play, because it's kind of fun to think about like the future of parks and greenways and how those things connect to your specific neighborhood if you're in Metro Nashville. So that's definitely a cool one to check out. And it has, parks and greenways can also serve as transportation. A lot of people, if you don't have a car, you can use a greenway to get to where you're going and have a safe and comfortable multimodal and interactive journey on your commute, even potentially. So, and also recreation as well. So I think that's sort of how I view what like and if we were actually able to provide those amenities within a 10-minute walk of everybody's household or place they live, I think it would be, that would ultimately produce a pretty socially sustainable city as well. So I guess that's my sort of take on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we're thinking, only within a 10-minute walk away, that's less cars on the road. That's less, the pollution that goes along with those long travel and transportation distances. There's so many intersections of how that plays with improving our environment as well. So wonderful. We're gonna press on to our next question. The Civic Design Center has so many interesting initiatives. I would love to touch on as many of them as we can, as you can share about, but I'd really like to start with the work around socially conscious design. So we kind of just stepped into that a little bit. So you have a continuing education course on the topic, and I'm wondering if you can help us understand what exactly is socially conscious design and how does that manifest in the projects, programs, and the work that you do.
Yeah. Love this course. It's super fun. I get to participate in it with the cohorts, and so it actually originated. It was original service of the Civic Design Center, and it used to be called Urban Design 101. And then it was like realtors who were all taking it, which I think is interesting how it's evolved. But then it just became less of a priority, and then we rebooted it a few years ago with this socially conscious design 101 title. And so then the reboot actually started when we invited architect from Mexico. His name was Emilio Cabrero, and he was tasked basically with um, he does a global design week, and it takes place in Mexico City every year. But in 2018, when we invited him, he was also part of a team that got a designation for Mexico City as the design capital of the world, and that was a really exciting designation for them. But it made them think about what does it mean to be a design capital, and the socially conscious design was at the forefront of what they were promoting as part of that week. And so following that, we invited him to speak at our annual event, which we do every year, where we bring thought leaders from around the world to Nashville to discuss how they implemented or did cool, really exciting things. And so he kind of introduced us to this concept of socially conscious design. And then we decided shortly after that was when we launched the class. And so it looks at the idea is to look at designs that can help solve problems, to bring awareness to issues that are often overlooked. And so that's sort of how you start to address a lot of those social issues, is look at sort of maybe underserved populations. And so it's a 6-week course. And it actually, if you're an AIA member or if you need AIA credit, you can earn it through this course. And so there's a continuing education component of it if you're interested in that. But it's led by our director Gary Gaston, who's been with the organization for 20 years actually, and so he leads each class, but we invite thought leaders from around the city to discuss different components of socially conscious design. So yeah, I would totally recommend it. I get to work with one of the classes, and it's a great way if you're interested in working with the design center staff on ideas for your neighborhood. There's a little turbo component, and there's lots of great discussion. And we're actually, now I think we're on our 4th cohort now. So we're starting to build sort of a collective of people who are interested in socially conscious design, and we're doing meetups and things like that. So I would highly recommend the class if you get a chance, or you need credit hours or something like that. If you want to join us for Socially Conscious Design 101, I'd love to see you there.
Yeah, I'm putting it on my list for sure. I think it's just a great concept, a great idea. I know recently we've talked in our office just about how do you engage all those different perspectives? How do you make sure you're getting every single voice out there that could be impacted by the work that you're doing? And so I love the idea. I'm going to second the recommendation to take the class, even though I haven't taken it yet, but it's on my list. Um, all right. Okay, make sure I'm not asking the same question again. Excellent. All right, over the years, the Civic Design Center has worked to engage both the public and private sector in community planning. So could you talk about how this works, how you approach bringing these different groups together, and how you involve broad stakeholder engagement into creating successful community projects?
This is a great question, and I think maybe the most important part of our work. It might be the hardest part too, but it's and maybe that's telling, but it's just I think what unifies the people we interact with is they have some form of belief in our mission, and so that sort of is what connects the different stakeholder groups. And so we have partnerships with like local government, metro, and then the state as well. But we also have pretty strong connections to the development community and architects, and then neighborhoods as well. And so there can be, I mean, there's been varying levels of trust between all of those groups. And so I think maybe the sort of, maybe we're sort of a middleman in all of that, but that could be helpful, And so I think that's what is the primary goal of our work, is to find consensus, to bring cross-sector collaboration, and a lot of that involves trust. So I think that's where we lean heavily on our mission in order to say, like, this is the work we're doing, and this is the common ground. And that's a lot of what I think public engagement is finding consensus. And so I think that's a really important part of the work we do. Um, and so yeah, I guess that, and I'll point it back to Turbo, where we can basically trial these projects, have people interact with them, and then work with elected officials so they can see, is this a way to do it or not? It's a way to test things and work through them. So that's sort of like in application how it could touch many sectors, and it can be even private development as well. So like maybe your neighborhood organization wants to see a corner developed, but something's going to happen there. So like we can help reach out to the builder and potentially make a recommendation, potentially even install something, and then work through, we can work through council members and local level government to see how we can actually implement those things you'd like to see. So I guess that's an example of how we do that.
Yeah. No, I will say, as coming from the metro government sector and knowing how important getting public engagement is, but also I'm appreciate so much that you mentioned that trust factor, because there very much is. It's a huge amount of trust that has to come from all sides to really make projects work and thrive. Because otherwise, I think everybody has seen where that doesn't happen, and where projects don't necessarily do what they were intended to do, however good the intention might have been. So just really, I totally agree. Very important work that you all do to help the city in making some of these things happen. So in follow up, is there a particular project that you've worked on that would you call out as a major success story for this type of public-private partnership and collaboration?
Yeah. So I was thinking about this, and I've been involved with the Design Center for 10 years now, and there's just been so many really exciting things that I think I would love to highlight. But I guess I'll just point to one of the most recent ones, because I'm really proud and excited about sort of that collaboration effort, all the process that led to it. And so building off the planning department's work on Dickerson Road, they went through actually two series of community design sessions. And so they did a south portion and north portion up to Skyline and Walmart up there on Dickerson. So basically looked at a pretty substantial portion of the corridor. And so out of that came a wide array of recommendations, but one of them was using tactical urban. We worked with the planning department on their recommendations, but using tactical urbanism solutions based on what we heard at those meetings. And so then shortly after that, a report from Walk Bike Nashville came out that looked at the most dangerous crossings and dangerous places on our streets in Nashville. Most of these are on pikes, but Dickerson kind of rose to the top as one of the more dangerous ones in terms of pedestrian deaths and walking injuries. So then in, I guess, 2020, then, we went through a lot since then, but there was a grant that became available from the health department that looked at addressing health issues, and I think living is a good example of a health issue. So we pointed to these issues that Dickerson Road was having, and we awarded a grant to work with Walk Bike, and we found a segment of roadway that's 1.7 miles, basically from Trinity to Ewing Broadmoor. If you're familiar with that stretch of roadway, is one of the most dangerous segments of road, or maybe the most dangerous segment of roadway in Nashville. And so we set out to study it and make recommendations based on that. And we've created a really nice steering committee and have done a lot of engagement. But one of the most exciting things that happened was we were able to work, the Civic Design Center works with youth in varying capacities. We have a summer camp that's called the Nashville Youth Design Team, and it works with high school students. They select projects they want to work on. And so we kind of showed them the report from Walk Bike Nashville, and they chose this intersection at Hart Lane and Dickerson. And they saw this as one of a huge problem that they could address with a temporary solution, or at least test and try something out. So they installed these light up crosswalks because a lot of the accidents were happening at night, and they got a lot of traction, and there was a bunch of news press about it and things like that. And so the sort of momentum from the student involvement allowed us to do, we did the first, we'd never done a tactile urbanism project on a state road before. Dickerson is one. And so we had the students present to TDOT, and they were compelled by the presentation. And so the students were kind of the catalyst to like get some actual change done. And so the students did this great presentation for our multimodal division at TDOT. And then they were so excited that we're hoping in October that there will be a more robust engagement process that will lead to actual change and hopefully a substantial budget from TDOT that looks at that 1.7 mile stretch, which is exactly our focus area. So that was kind of the outcome of this. So October 1st, look for some big news from TDOT on Dickerson if you're a neighbor or just
That's
interested
awesome.
in that.
Yeah, I am definitely a neighbor in that general area, so I will look out for that. That's just wow, that's very, very cool. And for those of you, some of you may have seen our previous episode. We actually had Walk Bike Nashville, and they talked about this issue of how dangerous a lot of these pikes are and the deaths that are on them, and some solutions and how we can maybe make some changes around the city to make our streets safer for pedestrians. So if you haven't checked out that episode, I did throw in our in the chat, but we can throw it in again, a link to our previous episodes as well. But this was a perfect dovetail into my next question for you, since the Civic Design Center, you work with youth and MNPS, so Metro Nashville Public Schools. So you kind of started talking about it, but can you talk more about that work, why it's so important to hear from these younger folks in our community when making choices for our city?
Yeah. So just to backtrack slightly, we have a program of the Design Center called the Design Your Neighborhood. And there's a few components of that. There's a 7th and 8th grade curriculum. And there's also the youth design team, which I just mentioned, which is more the high school level. We call it a summer internship. We pay the students for the summer to work with the staff at the Design Center to address a problem for the summer. And then the 7th grade curriculum looks at transportation issues and then gets them involved in the civic process and design thinking and that type of thing. And then the 8th grade curriculum looks at affordable housing. So we try to blend those issues together and introduce concepts that they might not be familiar with, or sometimes they are, and maybe some are even experiencing it firsthand. So the students are always, I think, some of the most exciting work is with the student curriculum, the design your neighborhood curriculum, and watching students being able to really, I mean, present pretty good alternatives and solutions for complex problems, that, you know, and if they continue to think about that from 7th and 8th grade all the way through, who knows? I mean, I think that's how the future is shaped, and the kind of the future of our community, I think, is the youth. And so it's really cool to see the projects they create. We've had tons of different strategies. I think they build little tiny home models in the housing thing, and so it's really cool. There's some really innovative strategies, and some might be sort of abstract, but that's kind of the part of the process, and thinking outside the box a little bit and getting students to really become involved in their communities at a young age, I think will lead to more activists, I guess,
Yeah.
in these issues.
Yeah, it's amazing how attuned our young folks are to a lot of these issues. It was our last episode. We had a student from MTSU that was just so incredibly well spoken about so many of these issues, and even younger. Yeah, it's incredible that they are so aware of all of these issues and have some exciting and interesting ways to maybe solve and create some solutions for us. So just I cannot say how much I love all the stuff that you all do. So the next question, you've already touched a little, actually quite a bit on Turbo, but I just want to make sure that we've kind of covered the main programs that you work on. So since your work in particular involves the managing the design studio and that Turbo program, is there anything that you want to tell us about these programs and how they make an impact on Nashville neighborhoods that we haven't already kind of addressed?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, I think we've kind of touched the point, but I also want to say maybe it might be worth exploring how Turbo sort of came to fruition.
Yeah.
It was a group that actually did Parking Day, and so if you're not familiar with Parking Day, it's sort of the intro to tactical urbanism. It's our gateway to this type of temporary kind of pop-up infrastructure. And so it was a group from the Nation's neighborhood, and they participate in Parking Day, but they sort of asked this question of how do we do Parking Day every day? They really enjoyed the once a year when they could do these types of installations, but then they, they saw some real problems in their neighborhood, and so they wanted to try to address them with tactical urbanism strategies. And so they used 51st Avenue was sort of their project to kick off, and so they threw a big block party on 51st Avenue, but they allowed 2 lanes of traffic to flow through the block party, which was, I guess it's what you could call a road diet. And so that's just either some form of narrowing of roadway in the planning world. But so they threw this block party. They allowed 2 lanes of traffic, that was a big hurdle in itself because there was no permit application that allowed for traffic to flow through like a block party type of environment. So that was a whole hurdle itself. But like I think it was like a week before they threw this block party, there's a lot of industrial traffic on 51st. There was a big oil tanker truck that exploded on 51st Avenue, and it was luckily no one was hurt or killed or anything. I think the driver had minimal injury but was okay. And had that happened in the more kind of commercial area, we at the block party they did some diagramming and overlaid the blast radius on the more commercial corridor, and that sort of showed people that like we actually need some traffic calming and safety on 51st Avenue, because had this happened hundreds of feet down the road, it could have been substantial. So they were successful. I think it was Mary Carolyn Roberts and who was at the block party and then was like, oh yeah, like kind of light bulb moment. She then pushed for the what's there now. Just there's a travel lane in each direction, center turn lane, but it went from 4 lanes to 3 lanes, and then there's the
Wow.
two-way cycle track on the northbound side of the road. And so that's an example. That was really the first turbo project, but all those people like had day jobs and other things to do. So they sort of passed turbo to the Civic Design Center. And so we went on to sort of formalize the process and work closely with NDOT and try to sort of sanction tactical urbanism in Nashville. And so that's been sort of our origin of turbo.
Wow, it's a great origin story.
Yeah.
That's a great success story. So are there any projects in particular coming up that you are most excited about?
Definitely. There's so much to look forward to, I think. And I guess with just like as far as one thing that's like a huge impact for a lot of Nashvillians is the Imagine East Bank study that the planning department's working on. I mean, I'm really excited about it at this moment in time, but it's if you go back to the plan in Nashville, there was a huge vision for the East Bank in there. And so really since our creation, we've been thinking about the East Bank, and we actually held a global design competition in 2010, and there was hundreds of people that participated in it. And the scene ran a few cover stories of like these really lofty there's one with like a river through the East Bank. So like water control is obviously a huge issue there, but it's something that has been constantly thought about since before the Civic Design Center even. So I think that we're at this moment where we have this opportunity to talk about the East Bank as a whole collective, as a city. And so I guess I'm just really excited about the sort of regional implications that these new neighborhoods could have. I mean, it ties in Dickerson Pike, it ties in Gallatin Pike, and there's even discussion about a new bridge to Murfreesboro. So then we start to have this regional and even international connection once you tie in the airport. I mean, it might be a stretch to think about it that way, but I think that even that east-south Nashville connection will be big for connectivity of our city. And so that bridge is exciting. The neighborhood as a whole is exciting. There's obviously this big elephant in the room with the stadium. And I don't think personally that it's contingent on the stadium. I mean, it could happen, it could not, but I think the development of that community, we can do it with what we were talking about earlier with sort of smart development, include transportation, include housing, and think about, obviously stormwater management and how we push for like sustainable design. I think should be really exciting to everyone. And if you haven't participated in any of the planning department's processes, and these public meetings are happening now. I don't have the schedule in front of me, but there are some upcoming, and I believe there's probably like a month or so left before it gets submitted to the planning commission. So there's time. I mean, this is also just, I mean, it starts to create policy, but it is ultimately a vision, and so there's flexibility in it. I wouldn't like harp too much if you're reading the plan. I mean, the details are important, don't get me wrong, but it is ultimately a vision, and will inform what sort of land use policies will be in the long term. So yeah, definitely, if you haven't participated in any of those East Bank processes, you should definitely do so.
And we'll make sure to get a link out in our follow-up email. So as always, we send out a follow-up email. So we'll give you all the Civic Design Center links that we've talked about and anything else we've talked about, but we'll make sure that's in there as well. So you all will have a direct link on to be able to look that up and participate, because it's an important thing to participate in these discussions. And yeah, I think I just saw some renderings that came out on Instagram earlier this morning as I was flipping through. It's very interesting stuff. So do get involved. All right. I've got just a couple more questions for you before we get to our audience Q&A. I will remind everybody, if you have questions for Eric, don't forget to put those in the Q&A. We will have time for those in just a couple of minutes to ask him your own questions that you might have. But in the meantime, we have just a couple more. So what part of your work has been the most challenging and what has been the most rewarding?
Yeah, when you sent this a question over, I think I had like a little PTSD, and it was like, oh yeah, let's go. I had to like relive this moment. No, it's good though, because I think those challenging times are things that's when you learn the most. And so, I think my origin story sort of started in this like transportation realm, and I devoted a lot of my time personally and with the organization to uh, the transit referendum. So I'd say like probably May 1st, 2018. That might have been the most challenging day of my. I don't know. It. I'm not like crushed. I'm like I know that this happens. Failure happens in these things all the time. But it was just like we were working so hard to like try to promote transportation as a city. Growing up in Chicago, I was used to riding public transit pretty regularly.
Mhm.
I always lived by a rail line of some sort, and I saw the benefits of those things firsthand. And so when I moved here and the amp failed, and then I was like, okay, here's the next chance. I was really excited about that and got pretty involved with the campaign and all that stuff. And so um, it was like door knocking. It was like educating
Mhm.
voters. We had the slide decks going and everything, trying to get people. And so like the I guess the defeat was like it was like 70% no's. And so like I think that was the hardest pill right there. It was just like, oh, this is like hard no. So but I think we totally, as advocates, as transit advocates, we learned a ton from, like, it was probably a necessary step. Like there was a lot of parts of the plan that maybe didn't make sense. There's a lot of things to consider in just terms of messaging and the way we distributed information and who we were talking to. And so it was, and looking at other cities, I mean, you almost need these types of failures to have a conversation as a whole, and then grow from it, learn from it, and advance. So I say it as like I'm okay. I joke about the PTSD, but I think that was probably like the most challenging day. But then I think in terms of accomplishments, I mean, like I said earlier, there's been tons of amazing things that I've worked on over the years. But I think in terms of just like big project that I'm excited about, we put out a book called "Shaping the Healthy Community: The Nashville Plan," and it's a pretty it's a few hundred pages, but it's very visual, and you can also get it at the library. And it was published in 2016, but it basically looked at Nashville and broke it down by transects, which is basically a way in community design that we identify types of neighborhoods. And so you go from everything from like urban to rural to neighborhood centers and that. And so this book broke out Nashville, and then we took two communities within each of those transect zones, and then presented alternative solutions and through interventions that we didn't actually implement, but we created renderings and ideas that like we could look to address um, healthy built environment solutions for each of these communities throughout Nashville. So maybe if you haven't seen the book, maybe your neighborhood's in it. It does span a pretty wide variety of neighborhoods, and so since I started interning, that was like one of our first big projects. So I got to really work on the book all the way through. It was its publication. So that, I think, for me, probably like the single biggest project I've worked on, and so just proud of that one. And yeah, probably the most rewarding. I remember we
Mhm.
did a big event at Lentz at the public health facility. So that was, I guess, that if I had to point it to one day, I guess that's the day.
Oh, it's great. Definitely, I feel you on the challenging day. I do remember that very much. I remember all the public engagement and the outreach, and I mean, I saw folks out, those folks talking to people really regularly. So definitely one to call out. All right, so I've got two kind of follow-up final questions. And this is to get our audience involved. So you talked about a couple of things, but in what ways can the public get involved, our audience, our folks get involved with your work, especially to inform projects happening in their own neighborhoods? And then I'm just going to roll this other question in. Are there any events that you have coming up soon? I know of one that our audience should be putting on their calendar.
Yes, definitely. I'd say first and foremost, if you're not a member of the Civic Design Center, we have awesome, great member-only events where we can have really compelling conversations. We do like tours and things like that. So I'll make a plug for membership. If you're not a member, please become a member. There's everything. There's everything from like a $2 a month to whatever you want, really. And there's varying perks for all levels. So it's pretty affordable, and it just gets you get free access to, all our members get free access to urban design forums, and then other events, and then other engagement opportunities as well. And then I'd say if you have an idea for your neighborhood, definitely go on the Turbo website and submit a Turbo work order. And usually that process works with, you submit the work order, it goes on this big map with everyone who's ever submitted a work order. And then you can see like how you might, like maybe your neighbor submitted one, or maybe there's a project you're interested in and you want to be involved with, that's either going on or might someday. Then after you do that, we'll ask you to write a little blog post and maybe take some photos. Go out. We have a community voice blog where we elevate all these ideas from Turbo, and that way it's a chance to sort of have a landing place for your issues in your neighborhood, and then maybe a way for other people to interact with those and understand what the issues are. So that's kind of how that works. And then from there, we work to either find a grant. There's a few grants we kind of know of for these types of things that we can get, and then or figure out funding source to actually implement them. And then, hopefully it leads to interactions with government departments, council members, and a way we can actually make some change. So that's another one. If you are involved with a school at all that has 7th or 8th grade, please reach out, because we're designing neighborhood curriculums in about a third of schools across Davidson County, between charter and public and private schools. But we're trying to grow that. We recently expanded Chattanooga too, so there's kids across the state involved in designing neighborhoods. So we're trying to grow that program. If you know anyone at schools, please connect us. And then I would say, not necessarily related to the design center, but if you're not involved with your local neighborhood association or HOA or things like that, I mean, the power is in the collective, and the more you can have voice as a group, the easier it is for people like your council member or someone to take your ideas and make them reality. So join your local neighborhood association.
That's great.
And oh yeah, upcoming events. Yes, parking day is Friday, everyone. My favorite day of the year. It's like Christmas for me. I wake up super early and like run to the bus and get there at like 5 a.m. just because. And then so this year parking day has a theme. It always is public space themed. And if you're not familiar with parking day, we basically convert parallel parking spots into parks for the day. And so this year we're kind of taking, as housing as a city has become such an important topic and issue, we really wanted housing and homelessness advocates to partner with people who usually do parking day, like architects and designers, builders, and work with them to elevate the issues that the individual organizations have. So this year we have 20 housing advocacy parklets on 2nd Avenue on Friday. It'll be from 9 to 5 all day. Deputy Mayor Brenda Haywood will be there to talk about the state of housing, I guess, in Metro. And so that's at 10:30 if you wanted to be here at a certain time, but it'll be running throughout the day. And yeah, we'd love to see everyone down on 2nd Avenue and having this housing conversation with us. So yeah, that's our next event coming up.
It is a super fun event. I have participated a couple of times. I've enjoyed going and seeing these little tiny parklets. It's just really cool to see how people and different organizations are able to transform those spaces, and excited to see how the housing piece of this kind of plays into it this year. So it should be a good one. Make sure you mark it on your calendar. And that is our last kind of formal question, if you will. And so now we are going to turn it over. We have about 20 minutes left to be able to ask our audience questions. So I'm going to turn it over to Simone. Do we have questions in the Q&A?
We do have a handful of questions. Just want to remind everybody that if you want a question prioritized, just hit the little thumbs up like button. That'll help us like decide on what questions we have depending on how much time we have. Okay, first question that I will ask that has a little thumbs up. What about all the trees? What about trees and all this planning? I see many large, beautiful trees being chopped down in the Antioch area for sure. And then someone did put some resources about trees, but if you have anything on that, you can answer.
Oh, yeah, totally. I think I look at Route Nashville, part of the Cumberland River Compact. I believe they've done these talks with you all in the past. Maybe they haven't, but they have a really great sort of equity prioritization of, and they have a goal of a lofty goal. I think it's like, I don't know if anyone knows the exact number, but I think it's around like 500,000 trees to improve canopy in Nashville over the next few years.
My website is loading, so I can tell you in a second.
Okay, yeah.
But
it's a lot of trees.
Sounds right.
Yeah. And so they actually have funding to plant trees that are a certain circumference in size. And so you can go on route, and there's actually neighborhood planting captains in these priority areas that are based on their sort of equity lens. And Antioch is one of those areas that is a priority for them. And so definitely reach out to Route Nashville and figure out who your planting captain is, because I think they would be able to help you if you have a specific area in mind. So I mean, I lean on them for all my tree needs. We actually have a pretty good amount of tree advocacy, I'd say, here in Nashville. And I think maybe a lot of that momentum might have come from the NFL or something. If you were here a few years ago when the draft came and cut down some cherry trees, there was a big, what do we call it? Cherry tree gate or tree gate or something like that, little scandal. But it really galvanized the tree community here, and I think organized a lot of people. And so although that instance was only, it was like, I think it was like 10 trees or something, it made us have this really, I think, important conversation about trees and tree canopy, heat island, and those kind of bigger issues. I mean, the cherry trees are great, they look amazing and do what they do on downtown, but it really elevated this issue about our needs for tree canopy in Davidson County. In the book I worked on, Shaping Healthy Communities, we did a diagnosis. Mind you, this is 2016 numbers. I think if it was possible to plant what we already had in Nashville, Davidson County, we needed 7 times of what we have to become carbon neutral. And like, obviously that's not going to happen, but it's interesting to think about how, we're a long way off from like trees being able to offset our carbon. And so, just with that in mind, I mean, that's like we need to be, and it's more than the carbon. It's shade, for what it makes for more walkable neighborhoods. It actually has traffic calming effects if it's close enough to a roadway. And then I discussed this with a researcher who's out of Louisville, who's looking at analyzing tree canopy through Google Maps. And so they could like basically say how effective streetscaping trees would be. And I need to follow up with this person because it was super interesting, but it's like how we plant and the types of variety of tree we plant can affect carbon emissions and how comfortable people feel on sidewalks and things like that. So there's a lot of great research out there on trees, but I would just definitely say if you're not connected with your neighborhood planting captain with Route Nashville, especially in Antioch, get connected for sure.
Yeah, I am definitely a big fan of Root Nashville. I love that they email once a week talking about like if you should water your tree that week or not. They're fantastic. Okay. Oh, and just a plug for our last episode, we did talk a lot about some really good resources on trees. So if you have more tree questions, make sure you check that out on YouTube. All right, next question. Does the Civic Design Center engage with developers regarding projects they are proposing in Nashville in terms of including some of the elements you talked about being within the 10-minute walking distance? So like, for example, grocery access.
Yes, this is a great question. A lot of the times, especially if they're like out of town developers, they don't necessarily know about us and things like that. So we do seek sort of a dialogue with a lot of developments, but we've had developers come to us as well. And when we do that, we actually have a tool called the Neighborhood Assessment Toolkit, which is really, I mean, it's not necessarily for developers, but it could be used by them, and that's what we usually have them. It's basically a scorecard that developers can use to evaluate their project based on our guiding principles. And so, they can kind of, it's a self-done thing, but then basically then we summit after they do the scorecard. We try to bring the either local leaders, or if we have the opportunity to meet with like a neighborhood organization or something like that, then we have them, the neighborhood organization or some other party, evaluate what they think the project should do, and then we sort of compare notes on the neighborhood assessment toolkit and how it's often really interesting to have like a neighborhood perspective for the exact same thing of how a project could look. So we are, I think, we're also going through a strategic planning process now, and I think it's going to be a priority for our organization to update that. We did that shortly after the book in 2016, so it probably needs some attention. But it's a tool. You can download it for free. It's on our website. If you want to like sort of have this conversation with a developer using sort of like a neutral party, but using what is sort of defined by the Plan of Nashville as what we want to see in communities, is a good way to sort of begin dialogue and start to have these conversations about smart and sustainable development.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Next question. What are you doing to change zoning laws, which are directly responsible for suburban sprawl and inefficient use of land, space, and money?
Yes, great question. We've been advocating for eliminating parking minimums for a long time, and I think there's actually some legislation that's on the table right now that I think has actually already been read once. And so I think this has been a huge barrier for a lot of projects because we have a requirement for parking, especially in areas that people might even consider transit-oriented development, where there is access to our bus system or even the train. So it's looking at those areas in particular. I mean, there's been urban design overlays that have taken place in certain neighborhoods that allow exemption for those types of things, but we've been vocal about the need for elimination of that, and I think it's happening soon. And I think I forget which, I think it's Council Member O'Connell who's leading the charge on that, and maybe a few others, but that's sort of an exciting thing that is coming soon, that I think will work to address especially sprawl, because part of that type of development is centered around automobile access. And so if we can make walking more enticing or riding the bus more enticing through policy, then and also a big part of these projects too is financing isn't available for these projects, so unless you incorporate a certain amount of parking. So it's hard because there's a lot of different angles that we have to address, especially like funding projects. And so if we can start to amend policy that looks at car-centric design, then that's probably the first stepping stone, and then we can look to talk about how, or maybe even incentives for transit-oriented development and things like that. So I think for us, probably we call it TOD, transit-oriented development. That's probably a near future advocacy effort that if you're interested in trying to address sprawl, especially as Nashville is growing so rapidly, that's probably the next front, I'd say, in terms of some zoning policy to get involved with.
Excellent. All right. Next question is from Pam. She says, I hear from so many residents that there are like-minded people with ideas to make neighborhoods greener, but between properties zoned decades ago and developers taking advantage of that zoning, residents are left with more approved buildings and loss of trees and green space. How are you working with older zoning to ensure that it reflects current needs of the density and loss of green space? So I guess tying in like the past two questions a bit.
Yeah. Well, there is the Nashville Tree Corps. Is that? Yeah, I think that's the group. It's led by someone named Jim Gregory, and he's been at the forefront of the sort of green space policy for as long as I've known him. I don't know how long he's lived here, but he's been successful in sort of galvanizing neighbors to support tree legislation. So then he worked to I forget which neighborhood was sort of the guinea pig for all of it, but it was looking at policy that said, if you're building a certain amount, you need X amount of trees. So I think that's like deliberately how we're starting to address, and I believe it's I think maybe this tree podcast or the last session or whichever the tree episode was would have probably a better response to this question than but I know there is efforts to ensure that we're not cutting down trees, and then also planting new trees if you have a certain amount of frontage or things like that.
All right, thank you. Another question. Are most efforts being targeted at downtown Metro, or are the peripheral areas of Davidson County being incorporated into designs as well? And then going along with this, how do you define a neighborhood, like through size, location, density?
Yeah, well, I guess there's a few ways to look at this. In terms of defining a neighborhood, there's actually the planning department zones what I mentioned before are called transects, where there's a definition of what they are. It's basically based on density and housing typology and form. And so that's how transects are defined. And I've said housing, but I meant building. And so that's how they're, by definition, that's how neighborhoods are defined. And there's several tiers, and it's everything from rural to urban, basically, and to core. And then there's anomalies like centers, and we don't have to get into that. But if you're interested in that, definitely take a look at the book, Shaping the Healthy Community. It can very well define those things. And then I think there's also neighborhoods that have been established that by past neighbors you can look at. I think Google actually has most of the neighborhoods that are defined by the planning department. And so that's how I define a neighborhood, by what is listed as a neighbor. Like, how do they have a neighborhood association? It doesn't even matter, but those are, the collective voice makes for stronger neighborhood associations. And so those will be more prominent probably when you're looking. And so I think, yeah, you can look on the planning's website to see what neighborhoods have been defined. And then there's also things, I heard about the creation of a wedge of a neighborhood in the Sobro area, which is south, called Pie Town. And I heard that was created by somebody, a resident or a business owner, I can't remember, just naming it on Google. And so, and it's taken shape, you know, it's sort of within the last 10 years, I've sort of heard people talk about Pytown as a real place. And so, you know, it is that now. It's our perception of it. So I think it's kind of loose, but there's also hard definitions that you can look for if you're looking to define neighborhoods. And our efforts are not only focused on downtown. Our office is downtown. We think a lot. We try to be equitable in our project selection and work within neighborhoods. We use that neighborhood assessment toolkit as a filter for our own projects, and so there's sort of a lot of factors, and that's also part of our strategic planning efforts. So again, a lot of it comes with we do outreach to neighborhoods that we think are underserved, but we also work with people who reach out to us and want to see change in their neighborhood. So yeah, we're not specific, and we're not even specific to Davidson County. We've recently done work in Clarksville. I mentioned Chattanooga earlier, and so yeah, we're not necessarily here in Nashville, but this is where we are, and so that's where a lot of our work is.
Excellent. Yeah, I recently also heard about the Pie Town thing. I don't remember where I heard it, but I think it's fascinating because it like just looks like a pie on Google Maps. So
Yeah.
they just called it that.
Yeah.
You probably have time for one or two more questions. This is from Pam. She said her husband is a native of Chicago. He moved to Nashville over 20 years ago. He still questions seeing the growth of Nashville, why a rail transit system, both light and heavy rail, have not been expanded. And buses are a good final destination solution after utilizing the rail system. So can you talk a little bit about public transit and plans for that?
My favorite topic. I think, yeah, and coming from Chicago too, I was well versed in the commuter rail, the heavy rail, and also I lived by the L for many years, and so yes, those are, I think the benefits of rail are that of permanency and often, like with the L, for example, frequency, and so the development, I mean, is that's a way, you know, rail can catalyze development real fast because it has that staying power, where buses, I mean, we've seen even I think it was 2018 when there was lines eliminated and like things like that. So however, just given Nashville's appetite for transit, I might advocate for things like bus rapid transit and sort of the middle ground of between rail and bus. And so if you're not familiar with bus rapid transit, it's a way to create dedicated space on our roadways for transportation, but it is through the mode of using a bus that basically works like a rail. You know, it has space, it's delineated, it's separated from the roadway, but it uses the road and operates out of a bus like vehicle. So and I say that because I think a lot of what we heard in the referendum that failed was people were really kind of turned off by the price tag associated with light rail. And that's, I mean, I guess that's a legitimate concern, but we still need to solve this transportation issue. I think too, I don't know if everyone's been following the transit news across the country, but ridership, especially in sort of regional areas, is way down, and a lot of it has to do with this sort of post-pandemic telecommute and those types of things. So we're seeing high ridership in like generally working class neighborhoods and generally areas closer to urban cores, and I think that it's interesting how that is shaping the transit conversation. And so and we've had in locally here in Nashville, the regional connections ridership is down significantly. So it's hard to then justify those. And so is that going to make sprawl worse? You know, I'm just asking the question because the people that are living where this regional connection, you know, there's not as much justification for service. So are they just going to, you know, is it just going to be low ridership and they're just going to focus on the car for the suburbs, and then that's just going to exacerbate sprawl and that kind of thing. So just kind of something to ponder as terms of development. I'm hopeful that somebody will get transit on the ballot in 2024, and so that's what I'm pushing for and hoping for.
Awesome. All right. So we are at 1:14. So we are going to close and wrap. I know there were a few more questions that we didn't get to, but this has been such a wonderful and robust conversation. And you've talked and touched on so many other aspects of many of our Sustainable in the City episodes. So it's kind of wonderful to have the trees. And I know there were things that kind of touched on our urban heat episode and our Walk Bike Nashville episode. So this is kind of a wonderful bringing all those things together and how they work together to make a sustainable community through development and through public participation. So this has just been a wonderful, wonderful conversation, Eric. We can't thank you enough for being here, chatting with us today. So I will thank you, and I will remind everybody here. So we've shared a lot of links. You are going to get a follow-up email from us that will have as many of the links as we can put in there that makes sense to get you directed to all the Civic Design Center work that Eric talked about today and more, as well as some of those things like the Plan to Play, the East Bank development sessions that are going on, a few other things that we had chatted about as well will include in that follow-up email for everybody. And with that, we will see everyone next month, second Tuesday of the month, October. I don't want to misquote who our next guest is, so I will just tell you, we've got them lined up. They're going to be great. In fact, we've got the entire rest of Sustainable in the City lined up for this year. So we hope you'll join us next month, second Wednesday of the month. You'll get a link to this recording if you want to watch it again or share it with your friends. Thanks again, Eric. Thanks, Simone, for being here. And Christina will hopefully be with us next month. We did miss her today as our Urban Green Lab participant, but she will be back, and we will see you all next time. Thanks so much.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.